Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for this introduction. And first and foremost, also thank you for helping me organize my first independent webinar that I'm doing. I've been doing webinars before for Microsoft and for NAV. It's really excited to host one myself. I got the idea during the event season, and we announced the first one a week ago, and we had over 100 people registering, which made us a little bit nervous because we had a 100 people limit, but we also know that the average show-up rate is 50 to 80%. Currently we're looking at almost 60 attendees, so thanks for spending some of your time with me. I'm really enthusiastic about talking about the subject. The subject that we will be talking today is an introduction to eventing and extensions in NAV 2016. This is one of the cool new features that we have as developers in the product. And today I'm going to walk you through the general idea of what it means and what we can do with it. My goal today is to inspire you to be enthusiastic, and then we have at least 2 more webinars confirmed. We have a webinar in January by Søren Clemensen, and he will give tips and tricks for events, and then in February Gunnar Gessen will deep dive into extensions, and we have one tentative presenter in March talking about the subject as well. Hopefully that will be confirmed as soon as possible. So on the agenda today, I will go a little bit high level. I will try to avoid any deep dive. We have about 1 hour for the session, and I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. You can do a lot of things with events and extensions that I will leave up to Søren and Gunnar to talk about, but I will at least let you leave today after the session with a general idea about what you can do with it, and then hopefully have you back in a month to deep dive into more of the good stuff that we have. So on the agenda today is first we're going to look at events, we're going to look at table and page events, and we're going to look at how to work with events from the code. And then we will look at extensions, the general architecture of extensions based on the Delta files, and then we'll talk about NAVX packages. This is about all the slides I have. Everything I have is demos. We're going to just dive into the development environment and see what we can do. Why events and extensions? Why is this something that our friends at Microsoft thought was interesting enough to spend time in? The 2 most important reasons that I think are important are easy upgrade and make my tenant my own. Easy upgrade because if we start leveraging these mechanisms, implementing a roll-up update from Microsoft and implementing upgrades in the future will be easier than it is today. And if you run a multi-tenant environment, then extensions allow you to activate business logic for a single tenant or for a set of tenants inside your multi-tenant environment. It doesn't mean that if you want to do anything with events and extensions, you have to run in the cloud or you have to run multi-tenant. It works really fine in on-premise, and it works really nice in a single traditional NAV implementation, and it has a lot of values in those implementations as well. So enough talking. Let's dive into the development environment and see what we can do with events in the product. So this is the development environment of NAV 2016. And one of the things that I can do here is I can go to Tools Debugger, and I go to Event Subscriptions. If I click on Event Subscriptions, I get a list in the rotated client, and this list is showing me which subscribers I have to events in NAV. This is based on a system table that is automatically published. If I start doing something with events, it gives me an idea about what is doing this. These are the events that are shipped by Microsoft. You can see that events are leveraged in a couple of areas in the application. Microsoft is using it for service connections. They are using it for workflow a lot. Approvals and CRM integration are the most important areas where Microsoft implemented this. And then if you go all the way to the end, you can see that I have been playing around with the events in my own application area. Let's see if we can subscribe to something ourselves as well. To show how events work in the system, I'm going to build a new code unit, and I don't have permission to do that. Let's change the permissions and try to do that again. So now we are in a wonderful new code editor that I've treated us with, and here I can go to my globals with a shortcut that I need some time to get used to. And here we will create a new function. And as many of you know, I am a big fan of function names that explain themselves what they do. So let's do something like show a message when I change the customer name. Okay, so this is perfectly explaining what I want to do, and now I can go to the properties of the event. And one of the new properties that we have in functions is a new event property, where the default is obviously no. And here I can say that I want to have event publisher or subscriber. I'll come back to publisher later. Let's do subscriber first, because what we will do now is that we are going to subscribe to a system event in NAV. NAV comes shipped with a whole list of system events that will create themselves automatically on each table and each page that we have in the system. We get a predefined set of events. So let's go to table 18. I can just type T18, which will prevent me from going to this tedious list where I cannot filter. And then I have a property event function. And please notice that currently I don't have anything in between event function and on missing license. This is where people get confused about how to register this. I have a list of triggers on, after, and before the common triggers that we have in tables: insert, modify, rename, and delete. And I also have on before validate event and on after validate event. So let's say that we want to do on before validate, and now I get a new property which was not there before, where I have to select which field I want to subscribe to, and I want to change to do something on the name, which was what I obviously wanted to do when I created the function. So let's do that. And let's say that I want to do a message, hello world from events. Not really creative, I admit, but it should do the trick. So right now all I have done is I created a new code unit. I haven't touched on any of the standard Microsoft objects. So let's go to my client. We can close the subscriptions page and let's go to the customers. We will do that from our wonderful mini app, and we will change the customer name. And now what we get is a message, hello world from events. So basically what happens is that my business logic, my rocket science business logic, is executed without me modifying the source code from Microsoft. And I think this is one of the cool things about the events, that we get to subscribe to all the system built-in functions that we have on pages, that we have on tables. If I create my own table and my own pages, all the events are created automatically. If I add a field to a standard table, all the events that will be created automatically. So that's very powerful, very easy to use, and a very flexible way of doing this. I'm currently in the process of upgrading one of my customers from 2009 to 2016. And what I do is I go step by step through all the tables and all the pages and see, okay, what did I customize in the previous version? And I just move everything from hard-coded changes to Microsoft code to my own eventing code units. And then next time when a cumulative update comes, I can just overwrite whatever is there without having to worry about potential conflicts or what have you. So I think this is a very powerful way of leveraging events and a perfect example of easy upgrading, right? So let's close this one. This works with pages as well. If I have time, I will give a small demonstration of something that Gunnar taught me at NAV Tech Days, which I think is a cool example of what you can do when registering to page events. And if I don't have time for that today, then I'm pretty sure that Søren or Gunnar will show that in one of the next webinars. So this is what we can do from a trigger perspective if we want to do something with from the onValidate from a table, for example. But we also have a lot of business logic in NAV. The business logic that we have is primarily in code units. It should be in code units, of course. And there is also a way that Microsoft allows us to run events from code units. And that's a little bit more difficult to get your head around than tables, because the events that we have from the code are not some magic events that are created automatically, but they have to be provided by someone, preferably by Microsoft, but we can also create our own. So let's first look at how we can subscribe to those events. For that, I go back to my event code unit and I go to the functions, and I'm going to create a second function, also show a message when I try to release a sales order, please. Okay, So we show a message when we try to release a sales order. We go to the properties of the function. We go to event. We subscribe to event, and now we want to subscribe to a code unit. The code unit is code unit 414. We all know our victims by heart. We can play object number bingo if we want. And if I go to the list of event functions, then we can see that this code unit, this is the sales release code unit, it provides 4 events. The event type is an integration event, and I can do something on before release sales document, on before reopen, and on after. So let's do something on before release sales document. I want my business logic to execute before any of the Microsoft code is going to be executed. So let's do that. And I'm going to be very creative. I'm going to actually apply code cloning. And I'm going to share it. And let's make just a small change so you can see that it's actually another event with a small change. Okay, so now I go to my NAV client and I go to my sales orders. I have to go out of the mini app for that. Order processing, sales orders. And I can just take one. Let's take one that is open, and I go and release that one. And now you can see that my event is triggered as well. So that was to be expected, I hope. But let's see how this is created. If I go back to my development environment and I go to code unit 414, we can see we have code unit release sales document. If I design that code unit and I go to the end of the code unit, I can see that in this code unit I have 4 functions, and these functions have the signature integration event. You may recognize the signature syntax from test code units or upgrade code units, where we also have this within bracket explanation that this is not a normal function, but something special. So if I go to my globals, I'll use Control G right now, Control page down twice, and now I can see that these are actually normal functions like I always define them. But now if I go to the properties, I can see that this is an event publisher and the event type is integration. So this is the default way of making it possible for a developer to execute their business logic without doing raw source code modification. If you go to the event type, you can see that we have 2 event types. One is business, the other one is integration. You will see that all of the events that Microsoft has shipped with 2016 are integration events. The difference between an integration event and a business event is that if Microsoft puts in a business event, or if you put in a business event in your code, you promise never ever to touch that event again. If you touch it, you lose a hand. It's just guaranteed to be there. And the reason that we currently only have integration events is that this is a new technology for everyone. It's going to be adopted, hopefully, by partners and customers, and we will have to learn in a while which events are useful, how people are going to use it. There is a procedure where you can request an event from Microsoft, and then hopefully after a while we will learn which events are really important and make a lot of sense that we can change to be a business event. There's one other change, one other difference between a business and integration event, but I'm sure that Søren will cover that in the next session. I want to keep this at a high level. So these are 4 events that are put in there by Microsoft, and if we see where they are called, if we just do a find on one of the functions, you can see that the event is actually raised manually by simply calling into the function. So first we test if the status is already released, and then we do on before release sales stock. This is kind of ambiguous. You would like on before is on before. So this is on before, this is not on before, this is on after test status, but okay, let's not be too naggy about that one. And you can see that the function actually doesn't have business logic. I can put some comments in here, but if I try to write code, and I try to save the code unit, it will actually say that I cannot add code to an event publisher function. You can only add comments. Okay, so because this is only a framework. This allows someone else to execute their business logic. So this is actually interesting if you look at the way how we have to define events, and I'll come back to that if we talk about extensions, is if we go back to the slides and we say why events and extensions, is that one of them is easy upgrade, right? It should be easy for us to upgrade using events and extensions. And this is where it's debatable to see, okay, if Microsoft has put an event in here and I can subscribe to their event, then it's absolutely true that I'm not touching the base code. If I am creating my own events in Microsoft code, then I am still doing a raw source code modification. So if a new version comes out, I still have to merge my event into their code. It is a very lightweight raw source code modification. It is actually the same lightweight modification as we have with a hook. So if you go to my blog, if you go to the category events and extensions that you can find under NAV architecture, you will find that I wrote a lot of blogs already about this, and one of them is hooks versus events, where I also try to elaborate, okay, what is the difference, and it's up to you when to use what. I know that some people say that use events. Some people say use hooks because there are some advantages. I have an example posting routine. I can quickly show that. I have an example post that has a typical structure: test near, test far, do it, and then clean up. And in this code unit, I have hooks. So if I go to my global variable, I have an example post hook code unit. And here I can see that in test near, I say example post hook on before test near. And this kind of has the same impact as creating an event, but I can still go to definition. I also have an example of the same code unit where I have example post with events. And here you can see that I don't have my global code unit anymore, but I have 2 events, and the events are publishers, and I simply call the event in my function. From a merging challenge perspective, the difference is not that big. There are other changes, other consequences. One of them is the execution order of events. I don't want to spend too much time on that today. Søren will deep dive into the execution order of events. And if we have time at the end and someone has a question about that, we can also elaborate about that a little bit. So I hope that this gives an impression about what we can do with events in NAV 2016. In short, a helicopter overview, it allows us to raise our code on before or on after something happening in a table or a page, or I can raise an event from AL code, which is a manual process if I have to create it myself. Microsoft has shipped about 100 events in NAV 2016, but it's not as easy to find those as the subscribers. The subscribers are very easy to find. I can go to my debugger and find my event subscriptions. If I want to find the events that I have in my code, I can actually search for event with the square bracket, and then I can see that there is something here. What Waldo did is Waldo wrote a PowerShell script that analyzes the source code and then returns a list of all the events that are in the system. There is also a page on MSDN, but last time I looked on the MSDN page, it was already outdated. So I recommend running Waldo's PowerShell script. If Microsoft ships a new cumulative update, just run the script and see if there are any new events. There is a procedure to request an event at Microsoft, which is especially important if we start working with extensions. So that is my little bridge to extensions. Extensions is also something that I don't have a slide. I just want to demo. I want to show how it works. And then in February, Gunnar will deep dive into what we can do with the extension, all the limitations, all the best practices, and upgrade. Maybe we will come to upgrade in that session or a session later. We don't know yet. Let's close this environment. We don't need it anymore. We can close this one. And I go to my development database. To demo extensions, I need a development database and I need a clean database, because extensions is a way of shipping software. Shipping software in NAV and Navision has always been a process of shipping the entire object from one database to another. We do that using a FOB, which is binary, or a text file, but customers typically cannot import text files. So the standard way for us to ship software is we program something, which is then a raw source code modification, and then we simply go file, export, and then we say we create a FOB, and the customer imports the FOB, and we just hope and pray that no one has made a change to that database in between our development project and going live. The extensions is a completely new way and different way of shipping software. We are no longer shipping the entire object, but we are actually shipping the difference between the original object and the modification. And to understand that, we first have to go back to Delta files. Delta files is something that that Microsoft introduced in 2015 and backported to 2013 R2. And it is a syntax to the text files that allow us to save differences between text files. I'm going to show how that works in a second. First, let me explain the changes that I did in this database and how this will be shipped to the other database. The first thing that I did in this database is I have my customer table, and in my customer table I have added a field, very simple field, explaining that this customer is a super cool customer, and I have put that field on the customer card, super cool customer, and I have placed the field on the customer list. The second modification that I've done that we will ship is that we have created a new table, extension table, that has the customer number and a comment. And for that we also have a page, the customer comment, and I have put a link to that in the page actions. So in my page actions, I can go to my customer comments. Not really high-tech developments. Extensions also currently come with a list of limitations. I don't want to dive too deep into that list today. Gunnar will explain all the limitations and all the things that you can and cannot do in his session. But this is just to show you the concept and what Microsoft wants us to do with this moving forward. So right now, if I go to my development database, I can see obviously that if I go to my customers, I have my super cool customer flag. I have the same flag on my customer card. And if I go to my navigate, I have my comment where I can create comments for this customer. This is what we expect, obviously, because the change has been done in this database. If I want to ship this change as an extension to a customer database, I cannot do that from the development environment. The development environment don't have like file export as extension. That would be nice. That would be really nice, but we don't have that because the extensions are based on Delta files, and for a Delta file to exist, I actually need two databases. That's one of the most important things to remember if you start working with extensions is before doing the change, make a copy of your database because that's the original, and to be able to create a Delta file, you need the original database and you need PowerShell. So let's go to PowerShell. I hope that you're all familiar with PowerShell. If not, go to Waldo's blog, go to his YouTube videos because he has a lot of content on there that will help you get started with that. The PowerShell tools that come with NAV are the model tools and the admin tools. To start working with the extensions, we need both. So we need both of the modules, and we need the model tools to create the Delta files. To create the Delta files, we first need to have the full text files. The easiest way to create that is to just select the files that I have modified and export them to a text file and create the Delta file. The safer way to do it is to compare the entire database, but We do that using the compare NAV application object commandlet, where we have an original file, a modified file, and a delta path. One thing that I did not know before going to NAV Tech Days is that you can actually compare text files without splitting them into individual objects, which is cool. The PowerShell tools have a split NAV object file commandlet that allow you to split a big text file into individual objects, but you don't need that to compare the application object. So this actually creates the delta files, and this is what I wanted to show you first. So let's go to our delta files. The delta files are text files. They just have another extension, delta. And I have done some changes to existing objects, and I have created some new objects. The new objects are the easiest. I can simply go to table object, and if I look at the syntax of that delta file, it is exactly the same as we had for the last 25 years. It's the definition of the object, because nothing has been modified. It's just something new. It becomes a slightly more complex if we make a change to an existing object, because then if I open table 18, for example, I get object modification to the customer table. I get a list of properties, and the changes tag says that I have done an insertion, insert after, and change elements are a field collection, and I have added field 50,000 super cool customer. Right, so this is what I've done, and this is part of my delta file, and it will be part of my extension. The delta file has been there also in 2015 and 2013 R2, and there's nothing preventing you from shipping your software in delta files already. It is actually quite an interesting way of shipping. If you have an ISV solution and you have to maintain your solution for a lot of versions of NAV, you can actually create delta files, and then the partner that uses your ISV solution can apply the delta files themselves. You can actually apply a delta file to any version of NAV that uses pages. You can export a 2009 page and apply a delta file using the 2013 R2 or 2015 commandlets. It understands the syntax. It works on text files. It doesn't look at the database. It doesn't look at a NAV version. It's also extremely powerful if you want to develop beyond W1, if you want to ship your add-on or vertical solution outside of your country. How much hassle is it to create a localized version of your vertical solution? With delta files, you don't have that problem anymore. So the delta files are really something that, when I first saw it, I thought, wow, this is going to change the way that we ship software. So the delta files are the source of our extension. So what I've done here is that I have a folder, delta, and in that folder I have my delta files. I also have my pages. My pages also have modifications. I've also done an insertion, insert after control number 2. Everything in the delta file is also based on control numbers. It's based on field numbers. It's the IDs. Basically, what we have in NAV is what we have as namespaces, right? That's why setting your UID offset is really important, because you don't want to run into the situation that you have two extensions using the same IDs. So these are my my delta files, and the next thing that I have to do is I have to package my delta file and then apply it. I want to keep 15 minutes for Q&A, so I have 5 minutes left to tell you this. I don't want to rush, so let's. But 5 minutes should be enough. So this is my Delta files, and now I have to start packaging it as a Delta file. And there's a lot of things that come into play if you start working with extensions. I'm going to show you the easiest and simplest way of doing it. And the first step is to create an XML file, which is the manifest file. It needs a name. You can see that I have done this demo for the first at NAVAC Summit. It needs a publisher, it needs a version tag, and that needs to be created as an XML file. So what I have here is my XML file, and if I double click on my XML file, you can see that this is my version, it's the publisher, but you can also see that there's room for other tags. This is for the next sessions on extensions. And then I can combine this XML file with creating a new NAV app package. And this is where we get the NAVX file. The NAVX is the new FOB. FOB is a very old extension that stands for Financials Object, dating back to Navision Financials, which was the first Windows version. Now we obviously don't have FOBX, we have NAV NAVX. The X basically means that it has the same way of shipping as Office. So this is, if I execute this, I get my NAVX file, and if I open this in 7-zip, you can see that it's actually a zip file. It has the manifest file, it has the Delta files, but if I double click on the Delta file, you can see that it has been protected. So I cannot see the source code in my Delta file. So this is my NAVX file, which is nothing more than a zip file with my Delta files and my XML file. This is what I give to my customer. So I say, here customer, here you have your code. It's no longer in FOB format, but it's in NAVX format. So now the customer also needs to start using PowerShell, which might be something that we want to avoid in the future. But for now, we need that. We need to have a clean database. So right here, I have my clean database. And if I go to my clean database, we can see that if I go to customer table, table 18, and I go to the end of my table, I don't have 50,000. It doesn't exist. And I don't have any changes to those pages. Page 50,000 doesn't exist. Right? This is a Coronis clean database. And basically what I have to do here is I have to publish my app, and then I can run the command get nav app info, and that will tell me that I have an app, the NAVAC Summit app. It's the publisher mark, it's version 1.0, and it has capabilities, UI changes, UI adds. I have schema changes and schema adds, right? So this is the way that the NAVX, that the extension knows what I have done to the package. So it knows if it's a legal package or an illegal package. I can also have dependencies and prerequisites, but that's too much to show during this webinar. And the next thing is I have to install the application. This is where I, in a multi-tenant environment, decide which app gets, which tenant gets which app. If I now go to my role-tailored client of my extension database, and if I go to my customer, I can see that I have the same functionality. I have my super cool customer, I have my navigate action. And to kind of prove to you that this works, I have my clean database. I go to database information, and I can see that it's actually the clean database on this SQL server. And if I go to my, and this is where I have my clean database, I have filtered my tables on customer table. So this is my customer table. If I go to the end of my customer table, you can actually see that in SQL Server, the schema knows that it is a super cool customer. So the object designer doesn't know, SQL Server knows, and there is generated C# code that that understands the business logic. So this is extensions in a nutshell, really in a nutshell. It's based on the Delta files. It's created using PowerShell, but it's also depending on events, because the one thing that we cannot do with extensions is that we cannot add any code or business logic to existing NAV applications. So I can only subscribe to events. I can create a new code unit, and in that code unit I can subscribe to an event and run business logic. And this is where it is important that Microsoft gets this list of important events, because if extensions are going to be the way that I'm going to ship my code, then I cannot add an event myself, because I don't know if that event exists in the other database. And then I am dependent on what there currently is in the database. And that's why there is a procedure where we can request an event at Microsoft, and then hopefully, if everything is approved and everyone agrees, there will be an event in a cumulative update. And then as an ISV vendor, you can say that here is your extension package, and the extension package depends on NAV 2016 cumulative update 4. Because in cumulative update 4, I know that the events are there that I need for my application. And another limitation of extensions is that on top of extensions, there's no more open code. If I go to my development environment, to my clean database, I cannot create anything here on top of the extension. I cannot create a report based on table number 50,000 because it simply doesn't, the development environment simply doesn't understand. It doesn't mean that I cannot have an extension based on an extension, but then the second extension needs to be developed in the database, where the first extension is not really an extension, but the raw source code. Right? So extensions can be built upon extensions, but then it needs to be kind of the same company who does it, or I have to request the source code for the extension. We have about 10-15 minutes left for Q&A. So I think we should move there. The next sessions, tips and tricks for eventing and extensions, will be in January and February. After that, hopefully, if everyone likes that we do this, maybe we'll continue each month with topics on request. You will all get an email with a request for evaluation. And in that email, I will also give you the opportunity of requesting a topic. So if you want us to talk about Git, if you want us to talk about RDLC, if you want us to talk about SQL Server, PowerShell, just request a topic, and then maybe we will discuss that in one of the next webinars. So Andrew, do you have questions?
Okay, at this point, we don't have any questions queued up. If you have questions, please use the question window or raise your hand. If you raise your hand, we'll unmute you so you can ask your question. Otherwise, you're going to remain on mute. We have a question. We have two questions. Okay, the first one is from Nikolai. Nikolai, I'm going to unmute you, and then I'm going to read your question if you need to provide any clarification. So Nikolai asked, you mentioned a cool thing with page events. Can you show?
Yes, I can. Let's see if there's more questions, and then I will show that at the end of the session. I don't want to spend like 5 or 10 minutes and then don't give anyone opportunities to ask questions. So let's park it for now and then put it to the end.
Okay. Keith has asked, can we get a recorded copy of this presentation? The answer to that is yes, you can. And Mark will provide that detail after the session.
I will. Yeah, I can also show where it will be. If you go to YouTube, if you go to youtube.com/user/PromLDS, that's my YouTube channel. And this is in Dutch. I don't know. I cannot change this to English. But if you go to the playlists, there's like a lot of videos, and this will be added to one of the categories. I'll probably create a new category for this.
Okay, so the next question is this is from Simon. How does NAV manage extension in multi-tenants? It looked like the new field was not visible in the IDE.
Yes, so the development environment at the database where the extension is published does not know that there is that the extension is there. It's actually, if I go to my clean database and if I go to table 18, if I create customer table number 50,000 with something, let's create decimal fields. If I save this, it will actually say that an error occurred while applying the changes because there is a NAV app in the database that already uses this field number. So this also illustrates that field numbers, field IDs, everything is extremely important to understand if you start working with extensions. This is something that don't try this at home. Don't try shipping an extension with field number 50,000. Go CFMD so you're absolutely sure that no one is using that field ID. You can use prefixes for your field names. In theory, you can still run out of space. If the table already has 8,000 bytes on SQL Server, your extension package will blow up. The only way to control the extensions is PowerShell. So PowerShell understands in which tenant which extension is published. I'm not 100% sure if you can have two extensions using the same field and then only publishing them in one or two tenants. But even if that technically works, I will not go into that direction. So the development environment, and personally, if you ask me, that's kind of one of the downsides that we have at the moment, is that the development environment doesn't understand extensions. But if you go to the recording of the keynotes that we had at NAV Tech Days, and you go all the way to the end where Thomas Helsberg is showing his lab, you will see that Thomas is explaining a new compiler, and maybe, hopefully, we will get something in the future that a development environment or a compiler has better understanding of extensions. Okay.
We have more questions continuing to come in, which is great. The next question was, can events be seen via web services like any other code unit or page?
Can events be seen via web services? If you have a web service, like for example a code unit with an XML port is exposed as a web service, and within that web service you execute business logic that executes events or that has event subscribers, then everything will work as normal. It's the same code. If you have an extension that has a page that you want to expose as a web service, then, as far as I know, but maybe Waldo can correct me if I'm wrong, you cannot expose that yet as a web service. That's currently, I think, a limitation.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions here. The next one is, should we start to change our existing vertical solution to be based on extensions, or perhaps wait several months?
What I would do is I would start adopting the mindset of lightweight changes to existing code. But I would have answered that question in the same way 2 or 3 years ago when with Partner Ready Software we were talking about hooks and facades and lightweight impact. Doing code lightweight has always been upgrading easier, and I would definitely start looking at changing some of your code, especially leveraging table and page events. If Microsoft has put events in the code that you can use, I would start using them. If you run into the situation where you think that you have to create your own event in Microsoft Code, that's, I think, where the alarm bell should start ringing, and then you can request the event by Microsoft, or you can use a hook, or you can create the event yourself. I brainstormed about this with Luc van Vught, and he said, well, if you add the event yourself and you apply the naming conditions by Microsoft, then if Microsoft puts in the event, then you have a very easy way of moving forward. There's a lot of like pros and cons and debates and opinions, but I would definitely start looking into this. Extensions is something that I would be a little bit, if the current limitations of extensions don't interfere with what you do, then you can start looking at it. Extensions don't support reports, extensions don't support queries, it don't support XML ports. If you have a vertical solution and you ship it to a customer, the customer cannot create their own report on your extension. Extensions is something that I would also play around with, but maybe be a little bit more conservative.
Okay, we have a few more questions and we have 2 more minutes. So we'll continue to work on the questions and answer them. If you would like, we may run a couple of minutes over, just working through the last of the questions. The next question mark is your recommendation. Do you create a separate code unit for each subscriber or groups, or a group of similar subscribers into one code unit? Let's say sales order subscribers, or group it by publisher object. For instance, it says LEM subscribers. It says please.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. Is that how do you organize your event subscribers? And this is also there's a lot of ways of organizing that. I'm not a big fan of trying to put too much stuff into one code unit, and the most important reason not to do that is the maintenance perspective. If you have a customer database and you only have one developer, then if you put everything into one code unit, it's fine. But if you have multiple developers working in the database, and especially if you have a distributed development model where everyone has their own development database, then if you have one event management code unit, you will run into merge conflicts with every check-in. So depending on the complexity of the implementation, I would say create more event subscribers if it's a more complex implementation. If you have a vertical solution, if you want to be really nice to NAV, I recommend to use the same way as that we have been recommending with hooks, which is that every code unit that you subscribe to gets their own hook code unit. So every event, every object that you subscribe to an event get their own event subscriber. So you get sales post subscriber, sales release subscriber, so that you have a really organized way of doing that. And if your solution is certified for Microsoft Dynamics, then it will be like almost free of charge. And then it's a really nice way of organizing your code and avoiding code conflicts. It doesn't completely avoid the conflict if you check in, because you can still have two people working on the same event code unit, but yeah, you have to be like somewhat pragmatic.
Okay, we have a total of 5 more questions. There is some overlap between them. The next question is, can we create an extension with code on standard tables, or is it mandatory to use events?
It's mandatory to use events.
And the next question is, we're investigating using TFS with NAV to track changes. Currently, we export all objects as text and store those. Will we need a different approach for storing deltas or for extensions?
That's a tough one because from a shipping software perspective, the deltas are really cool. But from a version management perspective, if you have two versions with deltas, you cannot start comparing deltas. That will be a mess. So from a version management perspective, I would stick with having the complete texts and to be able to merge those. But I would also store the delta if I create a release. So the delta file from a version management perspective, from a TFS perspective, doesn't replace the text file. I would actually recommend looking at Git as well. Git has a completely different way of working with the files and handles a lot of the things that you have to manage in TFS yourself. Git will take care of that. I've been using TFS for the last year and a half, mainly because TFS was free by Visual Studio Online. But lately I've been starting to move to Git because there's a lot of positive vibes around that. But it's a completely different mindset. If you look at my blog today and tomorrow, there will be some stuff around Git. But it's also something that I still have to get my head around.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. The next one is, if I need to create an event publisher for my custom code, should I go ahead and create the publisher and subscriber or request it from Microsoft?
If you own the code, if it's your code, then you can create events you want. I had a meeting in my office 2 weeks ago with a partner here in the Netherlands that was creating a solution on top of LS Retail. And in that case, LS Retail becomes the Microsoft. The guy who owns the code, the company who owns the code, those are the people who can most easy put in the events. Because eventing is about easy upgrade. It is about creating a platform where we can exchange extensions. So we should be able to have an ecosystem where most of the databases should have the same events. So that kind of ruins the idea of creating your own event if you don't own the code. The guy who owns the code should add the event so that we can start sharing those events. That's the whole purpose. If it's just for you, then from a technical perspective, there's no difference between an event and a hook, and there's actually some downsides to events. But Søren will dive into that.
Okay, we're down to the final 2 questions. If, for example, we add customer data to some of the entries in the future, should that be done via events, or should we still be allowed to change the posting code units? What would be the best practice?
So the question was about data, but then it was about events. So I'm not quite sure.
So we'll ask for some clarification, and we'll follow up on that after the webinar.
Yes.
All right. The comments that we have at this point can Jet reports be added to? Can Jet reports see the added fields? So
yes, that's actually pretty cool. I know Joe Little is very happy about this. Record references and field reference understand extensions. That's actually, I don't think it's a loophole because Microsoft doesn't build loopholes. They build things by design. But you can actually code, the only way to code against extensions is to use record references and field references. I don't think you should do that like expecting an extension to be there. But I know that JetReport, it relies on generic web services that use field reference and record reference, and that mechanism is on the same level as the extensions. So yes, that works. And if I would like to come back to the question from Nikolai, can you show the cool stuff with the events? And I would like to ask Nikolai to register for Søren's session because I think we should move it to his session, and I'm pretty sure he will show it.
All right. And one final question as we wrap up. How do you remove an extension from a database?
That's a really good question. I would assume PowerShell. That's something that Microsoft never talked about. I will blog that. I will keep an eye on my blog. How do I remove an extension? Yeah, keep an eye on that title on my blog. But my educated guess would be PowerShell.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Appreciate your time. And a recording of this will be made available. And as Mark mentioned, he'll be sending out a follow-up feedback questionnaire.
Okay, and thanks Andrew for hosting it, and thanks everyone for spending more than an hour with us.